courtesy of the United States of America and the United Nations. And this is President Obama's idea of a diplomatic triumph. Wow. It is a deal unwise in the extreme, with a regime that is untrustworthy in the extreme. It should be rejected by the Congress of the United States of America. If the Congress does not reject this deal, then the damage must be undone by the next president. And it will be my intention to begin that process immediately. Knowing what has gone wrong, however, is not the same as knowing how to set it right. The threat of global jihad, and of the Islamic State in particular, requires all the strength, unity, and I will be unyielding in that cause should I be elected President of the United States of America. We should pursue the clear and unequivocal objective of throwing back the barbarians of ISIS and helping the millions in the region who want to live in peace. Instead of simply reacting to each new move the terrorists choose to make, we will use every advantage we have to take the offensive, to keep it, and to prevail. In all of this, the United States must engage with friends and allies and lead again in this vital region. Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, the most populous and wealthiest countries in the Middle East, are important partners of the United States. Those relationships have been badly mishandled by this administration. Both countries are a key to a better coordinated regional effort against terrorism. We need to restore trust and work more closely with them against common threats. We have very capable partners likewise in the United Arab Emirates who are willing and able to take the fight to the extremists. We have a moderate and quite formidable leader in King Abdullah of Jordan. We have an ally in the new democratic government in Tunisia and a fragile democracy in Lebanon, nations that are both under assault by radicals and terrorists. Across the region, responsible governments need no persuading of what the moment requires. It requires action, coordination, and American leadership to bring it all together. My strategy meets the unique circumstances in each of these two countries, Iraq and Syria, in which ISIS now has territory. And let's start with Iraq and the 5 broad actions I would take as president to help remove the threat from that country. First, we must support the Iraqi forces, which right now have the will to win, but not the means. As matters stand, the United States has been helping to reconstitute Iraqi security services and to aid the Kurdish Peshmerga. We need to broaden and expedite our efforts to help ensure Iraqis rebuild their security sector, not only to win against ISIS, but to break free of Iranian influence. And that effort should also involve even greater engagement with the Sunni tribes, whose fighting units served side by side with Americans to defeat al-Qaeda in Iraq and were then disbanded by the Maliki government after the United States abandoned Iraq. Second, we must give these forces the consistent advantage of American air power to cover their operations and to strike with fierce precision. The strategy has to include forward air controllers whose skill and accuracy would severely hinder the enemy's freedom of movement. This would greatly improve the ability of fighter aircraft and Apache attack helicopters to provide necessary close air support to local ground forces. ISIS fighters try blending into the civilian landscape. Our spotters on the ground will enable us to hit them hard and rarely miss. Third, we must make a better use of the limited forces we have by giving them a greater range of action. Right now, we have around 3,500 soldiers and Marines in Iraq, and more may well be needed. We do not need, and our friends don't ask for, a major commitment of American combat forces. But what we do need is to convey that we're serious, that we're determined to help local forces take back their country. Our unrivaled warfighters know that it's simply not enough to dispense advice and training to local forces and then send them on their way and hope for the best. Canadian troops are already embedded in Iraqi units to very good effect. Our soldiers and Marines need the go-ahead to do that as well, to help our partners outthink and outmaneuver. In Iraq's Kurdish region, we have loyal friends and brave and skilled fighters. If I'm Commander-in-Chief, the United States will make certain that the Kurds have everything they need to win. And finally, our strategy in Iraq has to restart the serious diplomatic efforts that can help that country move in the right direction. Only Iraq's Shiites, Sunnis, and Kurds can decide if they will live together and share power and resources in a way that will serve their interests, assuring the survival of their country. But these partners have to know that while the United States is there in measure, we're also there in earnest and for the long haul. That has been the problem of the Obama administration. No one believes we're serious because we've not made the kind of commitments that friends make with friends. They will come through for their country, but they've got to know that we have their back. Now, the situation in Syria is quite different from the one in Iraq. In some ways, it's even more complex because we have no large cohesive force to work with. And here, too, we have seen what ruin and suffering can follow when America doesn't lead. Of 23 million Syrians, about 11 million have been displaced or fled the country altogether. Imagine that. More than 200,000 people have so far been killed in the mayhem. The regime of Bashar al-Assad is deploying every ruthless means to stay in power. Long brutalized by that regime, now under assault from ISIS, Syrian moderates want to fight against both enemies, and they view the regime as the greater evil. It's a sorrowful picture when you think back on how it could have been avoided. Exactly 4 years ago, we heard words that still hang in the air of the Middle East, when President Obama declared, "The time has come for President Assad to step aside." Then, 3 years ago, came another pronouncement that any use of chemical weapons by Assad would be a red line, inviting tough consequences for the regime. If the choice was between silence and these idle, grandiose words, it would have been a heck of a lot better to say nothing at all. What followed is that Assad used those weapons again and again, and there were no serious consequences whatsoever. Having lost our credibility on such an epic scale, it is hard to get it back. But we'd better try, because the longer we do nothing, the more dangerous the situation becomes, and the more directly our friends and our interests are threatened. Our ultimate goal in Syria is to defeat ISIS and to achieve long-term political stability in the country. Defeating ISIS requires defeating Assad, but we have to make sure that his regime is not replaced by something as bad or worse. The last thing we need in Syria is a repeat of Libya, with its planless aftermath, where the end of a dictatorship was only the beginning of more terrorist violence, including the death of 4 Americans in Benghazi. Syria will need a stable government, and a transition free of more sectarian bloodletting will depend on the credible moderate forces we help to unite and build up today. To that end, my strategy would be to bring American influence to bear in 4 important areas of action. First, a coordinated international effort is essential to give Syria's moderate forces the upper hand. As it is, the Qataris, the Turks, the Saudis, and others have been supporting fighting groups in Syria, but these groups are not always working to common purpose. And if there's anything that moderate forces in Syria cannot afford right now, it's confusion and disunity. Under my strategy, the aim would be to draw the moderates together and back them up as one force. And we should back that force up all the way through, not just in taking the fight to the enemy, but in helping them form a stable, moderate government once ISIS is defeated and Assad is gone. It is a tough, complicated diplomatic and military proposition, even more so than the current situation in Iraq. But it can be done. We saw in the Iraq surge how Islamic moderates can be pulled away from extremist forces. and the strategic elements in both cases are the same. We have to support local forces, and we must stay true to our word. Second, we have to expand and vastly improve the recruitment and training of Syrian forces fighting ISIS. At the moment, too many in Syria doubt that they can count on us, which explains why our recruiting and training have basically come to nothing. We've spent $500 million on a program that has gotten us 54 recruits. When that happens, you know that the plan's not working out really well. I'm tempted to be reminded of healthcare.gov. It cost me a little bit more and got the same result. The website. The reality is our recruitment efforts have been failing in Syria because we're not respected anymore as a reliable actor in the region. And we have to change that impression with the clear, consistent, and credible action that every nation should expect from the United States of America. Third, we must over time establish multiple safe zones in Syria. It's a measure of progress that we've joined with the Turks to create a small ISIS-free zone in the northern part of the country. That's good news. But we need to go beyond, well beyond that, by establishing safe zones to protect Syrians not only from ISIS, but also from Assad. Fourth, we and our partners should declare a no-fly zone in Syria, and then work to expand that zone to prevent more crimes by the regime. Enforce that no-fly zone, and we'll stop the regime's bombing raids that kill helpless citizens. It could also help stop Iranian flights from resupplying the regime and Hezbollah and other bad actors. A no-fly zone is a critical strategic step to cut off Assad, counter Iranian influence, keep the pressure on for a settlement, and prevent more needless death in a country that has seen so much of it. When we talk about no-fly zones in Syria, precision airstrikes in Iraq, or any projection of military power to meet or deter threats, all of this assumes that such power is there when we need it. Yet here as well, the short-sightedness of the present administration will leave a cost. We're in the 7th year of a significant dismantling of our own military, in almost inverse proportion to the threats that are multiplying. I assure you, the day that I'm elected President of the United States will be the day that we turn this around and begin rebuilding the armed forces of the United States of America. A winning strategy against the Islamic State, or against any threat to ourselves and our friends, depends ultimately on the military strength that underwrites American influence. Let that slip away, and what would America be in the world affairs, except one more well-intentioned voice at the United Nations? We don't want that. In any event, of any effort of ours to overcome violence and secure peace, a winning strategy depends on maintaining unequal strength, and we can never take it for granted. I might add that this includes strength among our intelligence services, military and civilian. No men and women no group of men and women receives so little credit for doing so much to track dangers and to keep us safe. These skilled, brave Americans can be sure of this. If I become Commander-in-Chief, they will receive the tools they need and the gratitude and respect and the support that they deserve. A good many people who serve in our military and intelligence agencies are at mid-career. And I venture to guess that for quite a few of them, their calling has something to do with their coming of age in the Reagan years. Yet any nostalgia for that time has to recall not only a falling wall and collapsing evil empire, but also the fear and tension and the dead serious challenges that could have all played out so very differently. From the distance of decades, even the greatest successes in security and foreign policy can look almost inevitable. Of course, nothing had to happen as it did. Weariness with conflict ran pretty deep back then, along with despair of ever getting past it. But then along came one formidable figure who would not accept that way of thinking and he was the one who mattered the most. It's that way for us too, in having to deal with long conflicts and serious threats that are again on the offensive. And in living up to our responsibilities, we can always use a little more of the Reagan spirit, rejecting with contempt the idea that conflict must be endless, or that the spread of danger and violence is inevitable. It is not. For generations, American-led alliances, American diplomacy, and American credibility deterred aggression and defended the peace. This is the way forward in our time as well, led by a president who is resolute, as I will be, in the defeat of radical Islamic terrorism wherever it appears. We can protect our people, put adversaries back in retreat, get things moving our way again, and win back the momentum for freedom's cause. In all of this, let us never forget that in fighting evil, we're doing good. In stopping the merciless, we are delivering justice. And in destroying the violent, we're defending the innocent. This is the work that America is in this world to do. Let us meet that duty with confidence, faith, and resolve. Thank you all very much, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Few questions, if I may. But I want to assure you I'm no Megan Kelly.
I noticed. I can tell. My keen sense of observation.
Smart guy. You mentioned the plight of Christians in the Middle East in your speech. In some countries, Christian communities that have been around for more than 1,000 years are virtually extinct. So my question is, does the United States have a moral responsibility to intervene to stop this kind of genocide?
But for us, who? Who will stand up for the persecuted? Who will stand up? Look, Bob, I have a personal connection to this. My views on this are existed before, but because my daughter-in-law is a Canadian-born, beautiful, spectacular woman, brilliant beyond belief, and giving me two of the most precious granddaughters I could ever imagine. Her parents are Iraqi Christians. And I've been sensitized to the plight of Christians in Iraq. If you think about it, in Mosul, for 1,600 years, Mass was given, communion was given, and today it's not, because ISIS controls Mosul. And they will persecute and kill Christians. And they're fleeing. They're fleeing all over the region, not just Iraq. There are challenges in Lebanon, which used to be a peaceful Christian nation. Think about the ISIS-inspired terrorists on the shores of the Mediterranean in eastern Libya, executing, beheading 18 Christian Copts. Think about the Christians that are being slaughtered all around the world. Think of the precious Christian girls in northern Nigeria. This is our challenge, because but for us who? I think we do have a duty, and we have the skills to do this. These are not the most awesome forces in the world. The United States has fought wars against forces that were evil, just as evil as this, with greater military might. We can take these guys on. We have special forces that are the best in the world. We have military capabilities that are far exceed anybody else. I just reject the idea that this isn't important. This is something that would send a signal to the rest of the world that the United States is supportive of people that through no fault of their own, believing in their faith, are being killed and tortured and persecuted. We need to stand up against this.
president's deal with Iran.
Yeah.
What would you do? What would you do to up against this threat?
Well, first of all, if you're going to negotiate a deal with Iran, then I think you should have kept what the objective was from the very beginning, which was to never allow Iran to obtain the capabilities to build a nuclear bomb. That was the beginning of the effort. And we've gone from that to having, trust to verify kind of inspections to now, anytime, anywhere, to now it's like secret agreements that are signed with an agency of the United Nations where our members of Congress can't even read them. I mean, this is the wrong approach, clearly. So I hope that Congress votes this down. I hope it's with a 2/3 majority, and if it is, then let the president go back if he wants and negotiate a deal that's in our security interest. If that's not to happen, and I'm elected president, then on day one we'll have a strategy to deal with the multitude of threats that Iran brings. Iran doesn't just bring the threat of being a nuclear threshold country, which is real and serious. That would provide the possibilities of nuclear proliferation in the region. I mean, these are serious problems, but they're also the largest sponsor in every way of terrorism. Not just, by the way, in the region, but in Latin America as well, and other places. They support Hezbollah, that is active in our hemisphere as well. So we have to deal with that threat. We have to push them back in that regard, made harder because they'll have at least $100 billion of fresh capital to carry out their agenda. We have to deal with the capabilities that they'll get when conventional weapons sanctions are relieved, which is in relatively short period of time. To have a missile defense capability bought from the Russians, to have ballistic missile capabilities that they're developing, and then have conventional weapons capabilities second to none in the region is something that we're going to have to deal with. And the strategy needs to be to engage with the region, of course, with the countries that feel most directly threatened by this. But we have to lead this. We can't be part of the community of nations. We can't lead from behind. All this new language that is the antithesis of American leadership. We have to lead and develop a strategy to push Iran back into its own country in terms of its efforts to destabilize the regime and to make sure that they never have the capability of a nuclear weapon.
My last question. You mentioned some of the mistakes of Secretary Clinton with respect to Iraq. Could you talk to us about what you think of her tenure and some of the differences you have in foreign policy vision?
I would say the Obama-Clinton foreign policy will be remembered as a foreign policy based on grandiose talk and little action. It will be based on wonderful speeches, and then grandiose things like red lines. Russia's a regional power. 30 days later, they invade Crimea. ISIS is the junior varsity, and then they create a caliphate, literally, and announce their objective is to put the black flag of ISIS on top of the White House. This is the language of this administration, and their inability to back it up has created real dangers in the world. They believe in soft power. I don't have a problem with soft power as long as there's hard power behind it. When there's no hard power, you can't skip over that part. You can't just talk about things. We're not part of the community of nations. We can't lead from behind. We have to lead. And the way you create a more peaceful world, past is prologue. There's enough evidence in history, starting with Ronald Reagan. We're in this place to honor him because he understood that having certainty, having a word that everybody understood, friend and foe alike, created peace, lessened the chance of America's boots on the ground, American combat troops being necessary. We need to restore that foreign policy, and we need to make it more bipartisan. This last week, the president, and I haven't heard what Hillary Clinton's view on this. If anybody sees it, why don't you ask? That would be interesting. He says, the president says, for those that oppose the Iranian deal, I mean, there's solid reasons. Many people in this room, I assume, oppose the deal as well. There's legitimate, solid reasons to oppose this deal. The president had the gall to say that those that opposed this deal were in cahoots with the Death to America crowd in Iran. The Death to America crowd in Iran is the group that he negotiated the deal with. This is the problem. We need to restore a bipartisan consensus on foreign policy. You can't keep pushing down people that disagree with you, ascribing horrible motives to them, calling them warmongers every time they have a principled view, and make your view this illustrious, so intelligent view that no one in their right mind would not embrace it. You're never going to get the kind of consensus we need to create a more peaceful world unless you start with the premise that maybe people disagree with you based on principle, for crying out loud, and then maybe you should engage with people to forge a better consensus to get to a better place. And this is wrong. Across the spectrum of foreign policy, we see this. And Mrs. Clinton was the implementer of this foreign policy. I think the experience she has is real. I mean, she was Secretary of State for 4 years, but it's a failed record. The reset, Libya, Benghazi, the fight against terror, on and on it goes, and it's based on not backing up your word, where America no longer has any credibility in the world. I would just conclude by saying, name a country where our relationship is better today than it was the day that Barack Obama was elected, was inaugurated, and when Hillary Clinton was sworn in as Secretary of State. Cuba and Iran. Name the relationships where our relationships are worse. It starts with Canada, and it's a long, long list. The next president is going to have to restore these relationships because they're important in keeping the peace. Thank you.
Governor, thank you for those inspiring remarks. I think by the response from the people in the audience, you can tell you've got every single one of them on your side.
Can you all move to Iowa? We live in paradise.
On behalf of the Reagan Library, everyone at the Reagan Library, at the Reagan Foundation, and I'll bet everyone in this room, we have a little gift for you. This is an American flag that flew over the library today. We'd like to give it to you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I could ask you to just hold while our distinguished guest departs. And then we have a special request of you this evening. Everyone, you are joining us in the Air Force One Pavilion for dinner. We are not using these doors this evening. That's our special gift. We are not using those doors. We are going to take you back of house. You get to see what happens at the back of a presidential library. If you'll bear with us, we have construction going on in the Peace Plaza. So in about 30 seconds, our team will lead you out, down our hallway, onto our loading dock, and across the street. I promise, right? Good gift. Back of house, reach out.